Hiya.
Hello.
Can I ask your name, please?
Monica. Monica Mulligan's my name.
And one day I was in here chatting with you and you were telling me about your mother.
Yes.
Do you want to tell me a little bit about her again today?
Well, what would you like to know?
Well, how many children did she have? I think you were telling me she was very frugal, good with money, made her own clothes.
Yes,
and
she was very frugal. She was actually one of 10 herself. She was the second eldest, and there was 4 girls and 6 boys. And in the country, she was baking at 8 years of age. In those days, as you know, the mother would have the children at home, and my granny be in giving birth, and my mother would be out making bread and looking after the rest of the family while the baby was being delivered.
Yeah.
And so she was very hands-on from a very young age. And then she came up to Dublin, as you do back in the day, and she was living in Harold's Cross. She met my dad in Harold's Cross. She was working for a family there, and she was a housekeeper. That's what they did in the day. But very clever, very intelligent woman she was. Very frugal. She met my dad. My dad was from Dundrum. He was from actually a very wealthy family. His families were auctioneers, and his father would have been one of the first men. He used to travel up and down through Dundrum, through the town, in a horse and trap. And they had a big family. I think there was eight children in my dad's family, and met my mother, and they got married and went on to have 5 children. 4 boys and myself, 1 girl, an only girl. And
your mother made your own clothes and
my
everything.
my mother made all her clothes. She had 3 boys first, like 1, 2, 3, literally a year between them, and then she had 2 after that. There was 6-year gap between myself and my older brother, and it was like that time it was like 2 separate families. And the 3 boys, she used to dress them all the same because there was only literally less than a year between them. And she used to knit their sweaters, and she used to knit their socks, and she used to turn the collars on their shirts.
What does that
mean? Turn the collar means to get extra wear and out of them when they'd be going to school. She'd take the collar off and she'd turn it round, so you get another year maybe out of a shirt. And then she'd knit all their school jumpers. And she shopped she was very frugal, but she loved style, and she loved good clothes as well. And she shopped in a shop called Our Boys in Wicklow Street, which was very upmarket and fancy, and was there, I don't know if it's still there, but was there up to, I think it was there, well, it was there up to 15 years ago anyway. It was there a long time, but they done beautiful clothes. And she used to go in there. If my dad would give her a few extra bob, and he'd say, go into town and buy yourself something on a Saturday. She'd say, I'm going window shopping. And she'd go into town, and I always go into Our Boys and come home with something for the boys. And then, of course, she had me then, and my father, of course, was thrilled when she had a girl. Absolutely thrilled. And she used to make my clothes, and she stayed at home. At that time, women didn't go out to work, and my father worked 2 jobs at that stage, and my mother stayed at home to rear the family. And then my father got sick, and he had to retire, and my mother went out to work, which in her 50s, after being out of work for so many years, she went back out to work in her 50s. She worked in a convent actually in Blackrock and Temple Hill for the nuns. And my father took on the role then. He was a great cook, and he took on the role looking after the house. And my mother was the one that went out to work.
Amazing.
And
what kind of things did you learn from your mother, think? I mean, I know you learned so much. But
so much. Apart from the sewing and the knitting, and she used to take me into town every Saturday, just me. And we'd window shop, and she'd always go in and buy material. There was a place, I think it was called Duffy's on Talbot Street. She'd buy material to make dresses for me, and she was always stitching and she was always sewing something. No matter how big or small it was, she was always had a needle and thread. And she'd go around with her house coat and she'd have the pins and needles stuck on the outside of her house coat, you know.
Yeah.
And we'd go into in town, my granny had a sister.
Hiya, just some bags.
No problem. I'm being interviewed here.
Hiya.
Yeah. My granny had a sister who lived in it was Gardner Street, which one of those big old Georgian houses in Gardner Street. And my mother used to go in. We'd go into town, window shop, or she'd buy something, and we'd go to Joni's, my auntie Joni, for tea. And it was one of the old houses, and they were it was like an apartment in it. And this was the 60s. And when you walked in the door, there was a big dip in the floor, in the wood, the old wood. Like you'd think you were going to fall through it. It would go, it would creak when you'd go in. And when you'd go into her apartment, she had all the old furniture, and the table was set with all the old china. And she'd have her sandwiches and the tea, and the teapot, and it was just wonderful. And then it'd be dark when we'd be leaving there, and we'd make our way down for the bus, and then my father would meet us off the bus when we got to Blackrock. And he had a car then. My father had a car when no one had a car, and he'd meet us and bring us home. So,
And if you had to distill maybe like a piece of advice that you think your mother would give, what would you think it would be?
a piece of
Or did she have an outlook or anything like that you think is...
She had a great outlook on life. She was very, very intelligent, and she was very, she was ahead of her time. She was very with it, and she moved with the times very easily. She wasn't stuck in her, she would have been born in 1926. She actually had the same birthday as the Queen.
Oh.
So she was born in 1926, but was very modern. She moved the generations. She moved with them, and she was very, very interested in politics, and just very straightforward and honest. And just she used to give me advice, like when I had my own children. She used to say, you don't pick the kids up on every single little thing. That there's a lot of things with children that you have to ignore. When you're wearing, when they say something, if you make a big deal of it, they keep doing it. But if if it's something that's not too serious, let it go. And I found that did work when I was raising my kids.
And in terms of being frugal, do you think she would have any tips?
Being frugal, she was very frugal. She was able to save a lot. As I said, my father worked 2 jobs. She was able to save a lot, and she was actually one of the first people over in Blackrock. She was bought her home when people weren't buying homes back then. But she was able to buy her own home because she was able to save. She never bought anything she couldn't afford, and she always believed that save up the money and buy it. There used to be a thing called HP, which was called hire purchase. Never buy anything on hire purchase. She used to always say, wait till you have the money and then go out and buy it yourself.
Well, that's great. Well, look, we said we chat for 10 minutes because you're busy, so that's nearly 10 minutes now. And it was lovely chatting to you and hearing about your mother and their story. And we might chat again another time.
Yeah, great. Okay.
Gonna say bye-bye?
Bye-bye. Bye.